The storm didn't sound like wind, it sounded like something alive, something hunting. It tore through the mountains like a living thing, ripping branches from trees, hurling ice against rock, swallowing every trace of warmth and light beneath a suffocating white darkness that stretched for miles in every direction. Visibility was gone. Sound was distorted. Direction meant nothing. And in the middle of it all, something was crying. Not human. Small. Weak. Desperate. Ethan Hale stopped walking. For a second, the storm almost erased it. Almost buried it beneath the chaos. But he heard it again. A faint, trembling whimper, barely alive. Ethan's breath slowed as he turned his head, scanning through the blizzard, his vision narrowing, instincts rising from somewhere deep and buried, somewhere he had spent years trying to shut down. But some things never left you. Some parts of you stayed ready, even when the war was over. Especially when the war was over. He adjusted his jacket, snow already layered thick across his shoulders, and listened again. There. To the left. Low. Close. He moved. Each step was deliberate, boots crunching against ice hidden beneath fresh snow, his body leaning into the wind as it tried to push him back, tried to erase his path, tried to convince him to turn around like it had probably done to anyone else who had wandered too far into these mountains. But Ethan didn't turn around. He never had. Not when it mattered. Not when something needed him. And right now, something did. The sound came again. Louder now. More urgent. He pushed forward, breaking through a cluster of half-frozen trees, branches snapping under pressure, until suddenly the terrain dipped, opening into a shallow ravine partially shielded from the worst of the storm. And that's when he saw her. At first, it didn't make sense. It looked like a dark shape against the snow. Still. Unmoving. Then it shifted. Slowly. Deliberately. A German shepherd. But not standing. Curled. Tight. Protective. Her body was wrapped around something beneath her, her fur thick with snow and ice, her sides rising and falling slowly, exhausted but refusing to stop. And beneath her. Movement. Small. Fragile. Puppies. 5 of them. Tiny bodies pressed into her warmth, trembling, barely alive. Ethan froze. Not because of the cold. Because of what it meant. The dog lifted her head slightly, her eyes locking onto him instantly. There was no panic there. No confusion. Only one thing. A warning. Not aggressive. Not wild. Controlled. Focused. Protective. Ethan felt it immediately. This wasn't a stray. This wasn't fear. This was purpose. She didn't bark. Didn't growl. She simply watched him, calculating. Measuring. Deciding. And Ethan recognized it. He had seen that look before. In men. In soldiers. In those who had nothing left, except something they refused to lose. He lowered his stance slightly, hands visible, movements slow, controlled, his voice steady despite the storm tearing around them. Hey, the word barely carried through the wind, but the tone did. Calm. Respectful. Present. I'm not here to take anything from you. The dog didn't move. But her ears twitched. Ethan took one step closer. The snow shifted beneath his boot. And instantly, her body tightened. Not retreating. Not breaking. Holding. Bracing. Protecting those puppies with everything she had left. Ethan stopped immediately. Okay, he murmured, softer now. His eyes moved to the puppies. They were too still. Too quiet. Too cold. He knew that look too. He had seen it on battlefields. On men pulled from rubble. On lives slipping through fingers no matter how hard you tried to hold on. They didn't have time. And somehow, the dog knew it too. Because she wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at them. pressing closer, trying to give them more heat, more life, more time, even if it cost her everything. Ethan exhaled slowly, something tightening deep in his chest. He had spent years trying not to feel this, trying not to carry this weight anymore, trying not to step into moments like this where the outcome wasn't guaranteed, where the cost was always high. But here he was. Again. Because that's what men like him did. Even after the uniform came off. Even after the war ended. He took another step forward. Slow. Careful. Listen to me, he said quietly, his voice cutting through the storm just enough to reach her. You did your job. The dog's eyes flicked back to him. Something shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But something. Recognition. I see you, Ethan continued, his tone steady. You stayed. You kept them alive. The wind howled. Snow moved around them. Time stretched thin. And then something unexpected happened. The dog didn't move away. But she didn't tighten either. She held. Watched. Waited. And in that moment, Ethan understood something that changed everything. She wasn't deciding whether to attack. She was deciding whether to let him help. He slowly knelt down into the snow, ignoring the cold biting through his gear, lowering himself to her level completely. No dominance. No threat. Just presence. Just honesty. Let me take over, he said quietly. The puppies shifted weakly beneath her. One let out a faint cry. Barely there. Barely alive. And the dog closed her eyes for half a second. Just half a second. But it was enough. When she opened them again, she moved. Not away. Never away. But just enough. Just enough for Ethan to reach in. And the moment his gloved hands touched one of the puppies, he felt it. Cold. Too cold. Too fragile. Still breathing. But barely. His heart kicked hard in his chest. Stay with me, he whispered under his breath, not even sure if he was talking to the puppy or himself. The dog watched him closely now. Every movement. Every shift. Ready to react if he did anything wrong. But she didn't stop him. Because deep down, she knew. He wasn't the threat. The storm was. The cold was. Time was. And they were running out of all three. Ethan pulled off his outer jacket quickly, wrapping it around the puppies, pulling them closer to his body heat, his movements efficient, practiced, controlled. This wasn't new to him. Just different. Too small. Too innocent. Too fragile. He looked at the dog again. Her breathing was slower now. Heavier. Her strength fading. You're coming too, he said firmly. This time, there was no hesitation in his voice. Because he knew something else now. If she stayed here, she wouldn't survive the night. And for the first time, the dog didn't resist that idea. She just watched him. Exhausted. Trust hanging by the thinnest thread. Ethan reached out slowly, his hand brushing against her neck. Cold fur. Shaking muscles. A heartbeat. Still fighting. Still refusing to give up. Yeah, he whispered. I know that feeling. The storm roared louder around them. The temperature dropped. And somewhere in the distance, a deep, unnatural sound echoed through the mountains. Not wind. Not trees. Something else. Something alive. Something moving. Ethan's head snapped up instantly. The dog reacted at the exact same time. Her ears locked forward. Her body tensed again. But not toward him. Toward the darkness beyond the ravine. And in that moment, Ethan understood something chilling. The storm wasn't the only danger out here. And whatever was coming had already found them. The sound came again, low, distant, but unmistakably real, and this time it carried through the storm in a way that cut straight through instinct and into memory, the kind of sound Ethan hadn't heard in years but had never truly forgotten, a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the mountains or anything natural to this place, and yet it was moving through it like it owned the terrain. The German Shepherd reacted before Ethan could fully process it, her body snapping tight, head lifted, eyes locked toward the ridge above them, not in panic but in awareness, in calculation, like something inside her had recognized the threat long before the human mind caught up. Ethan's hand froze over the bundled puppies, his breathing slowing again, controlled, deliberate, the way it used to be when seconds mattered and hesitation cost lives, and he listened, blocking out the storm, isolating the signal buried beneath the chaos. Their movement. Not random. Not scattered. Intentional. Something was coming down the slope, using the terrain, moving with awareness of cover and direction, and that meant one thing: this wasn't just an animal wandering blindly through the storm. This was something hunting. Ethan's jaw tightened as he looked back at the dog. She hadn't moved away from the puppies again, but her posture had shifted, subtly, deliberately, placing herself between the direction of the sound and the fragile bodies beneath her, even now, even after everything she had already given. That alone told him more than anything else. This wasn't the first time she had faced whatever was out there. "You've seen it before," he murmured under his breath. The dog didn't respond with sound, but her eyes flicked to him for a fraction of a second, and in that glance, Ethan saw it: memory. Fear buried beneath discipline. Recognition. And that made the situation worse. Because it meant whatever was coming had already been here. Ethan moved fast now, but not rushed, every motion controlled, pulling the puppies closer into his jacket, securing them against his chest, his body becoming their shield against the cold and whatever else was closing in. He stood slowly, his eyes never leaving the ridge above, his senses stretching outward, mapping movement he couldn't fully see but could feel. The storm shifted again, wind cutting sideways now, opening brief windows of visibility between the trees above them, and in one of those moments, he saw it. A shape. Large. Low. Moving between the trunks with purpose. Not stumbling. Not searching. Tracking. Ethan's grip tightened instinctively. "Not a wolf," he whispered. The gait was wrong. Too controlled. Too measured. The dog beside him let out a low sound, not a bark, not even a growl, something deeper, something almost restrained. As if she knew making noise would only make things worse. Ethan didn't question it. He trusted it. More than his own uncertainty. "All right," he said quietly, shifting his stance slightly. "We move." The dog didn't hesitate this time. She rose slowly, her legs trembling for just a second before locking into place, her body positioning itself close to Ethan, not leading, not following, aligned. That changed everything. That meant she had made her decision. She was no longer guarding alone. Now, they were a unit. Ethan adjusted the bundle against his chest, making sure the puppies were secured, their weak movements barely noticeable beneath the layers of warmth he was trying to create, and then he stepped out of the shallow protection of the ravine and back into the storm. The wind hit harder immediately, visibility dropping again, but he didn't stop. He moved with purpose, angling slightly away from the ridge where the shape had appeared, choosing lower ground, denser cover, places where movement would be harder to track. The dog stayed with him, matching every step despite her exhaustion, her breathing heavier now but steady, refusing to fall behind. Another sound. Closer. Branch snapping. Ethan pivoted his head slightly, not breaking stride, tracking it without giving away his awareness, his body language calm, controlled. The shape moved again, closer now, faster. It wasn't hiding anymore. It had locked onto them. And then it happened. A break in the storm. Just for a second. Just enough. And Ethan saw it clearly. Not a wolf. Not even close. Bigger. Heavier. Shoulders built for power, not speed. Dark fur matted with snow, moving low through the trees with predatory focus. And its eyes, even through the storm, even at distance, were locked directly on them. Ethan's pulse didn't spike. It dropped. Focus narrowing, everything else fading. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, even though he knew the dog didn't need the instruction. She had already shifted position, placing herself slightly behind and to the side, guarding the rear, protecting the one angle Ethan couldn't fully cover while carrying the puppies. That alone told him everything about her training, her instinct, her intelligence. This wasn't survival. This was strategy. The creature, whatever it was, moved faster now, no longer concerned with stealth, no longer testing distance. It was committing. Ethan adjusted his stance again, angling toward a narrow cluster of rocks ahead, something he could use for cover, something that would limit approach angles. "We don't outrun it," he muttered. "We outthink it." The dog stayed with him, her movements tighter now, more deliberate, her energy focused entirely on the threat behind them. The distance closed faster than Ethan liked. Too fast. The storm picked up again, visibility dropping, but that almost made it worse, because now he couldn't see it clearly, only feel it. Hear it. Sense it moving through the darkness just beyond reach. Then, impact. Something hit the ground behind them hard, close enough that Ethan felt the vibration through his boots. He turned instantly, shifting his weight, ready, but the creature didn't attack. It circled. Testing. Measuring. Smart. Too smart. The dog stepped forward slightly, placing herself between Ethan and the movement, her body low, ready, her eyes locked into the storm like she could see what he couldn't. "No," Ethan said quietly, placing a firm hand against her side. "We don't split." She hesitated for half a second. Then stayed. That mattered. That meant she trusted his call. Another pass. Closer. The creature moved again, faster now, cutting through the storm like it wasn't even there. Ethan caught a glimpse of it again, closer this time, too close, and what he saw made something shift inside him. Scars. Old. Deep. Not natural. Not random. This thing had been in fights before. Survived them. Learned from them. This wasn't just a predator. This was something that had adapted. Something that had changed. And then it lunged. No warning this time. No hesitation. Straight in. Ethan reacted instantly, pivoting hard, using the terrain, forcing the angle tight, his body turning sideways to protect the puppies, his free arm coming up to deflect, redirect, control the impact instead of meeting it head-on. The creature hit him hard, but not fully. Not clean. He had shifted just enough. Just in time. The force still drove him back a step, boots sliding in the snow, but he held. And then Ranger moved. Not wild. Not reckless. Precise. She struck from the side, targeting the flank, not to kill, not to chase, but to interrupt. To break the momentum. To buy time. The creature twisted, reacting instantly, faster than anything that size should have been able to move, but it pulled back instead of pressing forward. Reassessing. Learning. Ethan steadied himself, breathing controlled, heart locked into rhythm, the puppies still secured against his chest. "Yeah," he said under his breath. "You're not normal." The creature circled again, slower now, more cautious. It had felt them. Tested them. And now it was recalculating. Which meant one thing. This wasn't over. Not even close. And then, the dog did something unexpected. She stepped forward. Not attacking. Not charging. Just, stepping into the open space between Ethan and the creature. Her body low. Her eyes locked. Her entire presence focused into a single, silent message. Not fear. Not aggression. Warning. And for the first time, the creature stopped. Completely. The storm howled around them. Snow moved. Time stretched. And in that moment, something passed between them. Something Ethan couldn't fully explain. But he felt it. And whatever it was, it changed the fight. Because the creature didn't attack again. It didn't retreat either. It just stood there, watching. Waiting. And then, slowly, it stepped back into the storm. And disappeared. Ethan didn't move. Didn't relax. Not yet. Because something about that wasn't right. Predators didn't just stop. They didn't just walk away. Unless, they were called off. His head lifted slowly, eyes scanning the ridge again. And this time, he saw something else. Not an animal. Not a shadow. A figure. Standing still. Watching. And then, it moved. The figure didn't run, didn't panic, didn't even hesitate. It simply turned and moved through the storm with the same controlled precision Ethan had seen in men who knew exactly how to disappear, men who didn't fear being seen because they understood how quickly they could vanish again. And that realization hit harder than the attack itself because it meant one thing with absolute clarity: this was no accident, no random encounter in the mountains, no isolated moment of survival between a man and a dog against nature. This was something orchestrated, something deliberate, something that had already been set in motion long before Ethan had ever stepped foot into this storm. Ranger saw it too, her body tightening again, not in fear but in recognition, the same recognition Ethan had felt earlier when their eyes first met, the silent understanding that whatever this was, she had been running from it for longer than he had been aware of it, and now it had followed them both. Ethan's grip adjusted instinctively around the puppies, pulling them tighter against his chest, feeling their faint, fragile movements beneath the layers of fabric and warmth, reminding him of exactly what was at stake, exactly what he could not afford to lose. "We don't chase," he said quietly, more to himself than to Ranger, but she stayed close, aligned, understanding the decision without needing to hear the reasoning behind it. Because chasing meant exposure. Chasing meant walking into something designed for them. And Ethan had walked into enough traps in his life to recognize the shape of one before it closed. Instead, he turned slightly, scanning the terrain again, recalculating their path, looking for something more defensible, something that would give them time, shelter, and visibility. The storm was still raging, but the terrain ahead dipped again, deeper this time, leading into a narrow stretch of forest that looked denser, darker, but potentially safer from direct exposure. "That's our way out," he murmured. Ranger didn't question it. She moved when he moved, her body still trembling slightly from exhaustion, but her focus unbroken, her loyalty now fully transferred from guarding the puppies alone, to guarding them together. They pushed forward again, the snow thick beneath their feet, branches snapping as they forced their way through the outer edge of the forest, the wind dulling slightly as the trees began to break its force, but the darkness inside was heavier, thicker, swallowing light and sound in a way that made every step feel like stepping into something unknown. Ethan slowed his pace slightly, adjusting to the change, his eyes scanning constantly, not just for movement but for patterns, for anything that didn't belong, anything that stood out against the natural chaos of the storm and the forest combined. Ranger stayed tight beside him, her nose working constantly, pulling in scent, filtering through layers of snow, cold, and fear, searching for the one thing that mattered, the threat. And then she stopped. Not abruptly. Not violently. Just stopped. Her body went still. Her ears lifted. Her head angled slightly to the right. Ethan froze with her, his entire body locking into silence, his breathing slowing again, controlled, deliberate, his senses stretching outward into the darkness around them. At first, nothing. Just wind moving through branches, snow falling softly between the trees, the faint sound of his own heartbeat in his ears. Then, something else. A sound too soft to be random. Too deliberate to be natural. Footsteps. Not heavy. Not careless. Measured. Controlled. Moving parallel to them, not approaching directly, not retreating, just tracking. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "We're being flanked," he whispered. Ranger didn't move, but her body shifted just enough to adjust her angle, covering the direction of the sound without breaking formation, without exposing their position more than necessary. That kind of awareness didn't come from instinct alone. That came from experience. From training. From survival in situations where mistakes weren't forgiven. "You weren't just protecting them," Ethan murmured quietly. "You were running." The realization settled heavy in his chest. Ranger wasn't just a stray mother trying to keep her puppies alive in a storm. She was something more. Something trained. Something that had been part of something bigger. And now, whatever she had escaped, had found her again. The footsteps shifted slightly, closing distance just enough to be felt more clearly now, the rhythm steady, confident, not rushing, not hesitating. Whoever was out there wasn't worried. That made Ethan's mind move faster. Because confidence like that only came from two things: superiority or control. And right now, Ethan wasn't willing to assume either one in their favor. He adjusted his stance slightly, angling toward a thicker cluster of trees ahead, something that would break line of sight, something that would force whoever was tracking them to either close in or lose visual contact. "We cut through there," he said softly. Ranger moved immediately, no hesitation, no question, her body staying low, controlled, every step deliberate despite her exhaustion. They shifted direction together, moving deeper into the forest, the darkness thickening around them, the storm's noise fading slightly but replaced by something worse, the quiet. The kind of quiet that made every small sound louder, every movement more noticeable, every breath more significant. The footsteps followed. Still parallel. Still controlled. Still patient. Ethan didn't look back. Didn't need to. He could feel it. The pressure. The presence. The weight of something watching them from just beyond the edge of visibility. Then, a new sound. Not behind them. Not beside them. Ahead. Ethan stopped instantly, his body going rigid, his mind snapping into full alert as he listened. A branch shifted. Slow. Careful. Someone, or something, was in front of them too. Ranger's reaction was immediate. Her body lowered slightly, her muscles tightening, her focus splitting between two directions now. Behind, and ahead. They were being boxed in. Ethan exhaled slowly, his breath steady despite the rising tension. "All right," he whispered. "Now we're talking." Because this wasn't random movement anymore. This was coordination. This was strategy. This was human. His eyes scanned the trees ahead, looking for shapes, for outlines, for anything that didn't belong, and then, he saw it. A figure. Closer this time. Not hiding completely. Just enough to stay obscured. Watching. Waiting. And then, another. To the left. And another. Behind. Ethan's grip tightened around the puppies, his body shifting slightly, placing himself at the center of a triangle he hadn't chosen but now had to control. Ranger moved closer to him, pressing slightly against his leg, not out of fear, but alignment. Ready. Together. And then, one of the figures stepped forward. Slow. Calm. Deliberate. A man. His face partially covered, his posture relaxed in a way that didn't match the situation, his eyes locked directly onto Ethan. "You should have kept walking," the man said, his voice low, steady, carrying through the quiet in a way that felt far more dangerous than shouting ever could. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He didn't lower his guard. He didn't shift his stance. He just looked at him. Studied him. Measured him. "You've been following her," Ethan said finally, his voice just as controlled. The man's expression didn't change. "She doesn't belong out here." Ranger's body tensed instantly at that. Ethan felt it. Understood it. And something inside him shifted. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "I don't think she belongs with you either." The man tilted his head slightly. Not anger. Not frustration. Curiosity. "You don't understand what she is," he said. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "I understand enough." The man took another step forward. The others didn't move. But Ethan felt them. Still there. Still watching. Still waiting. "That dog isn't a stray," the man continued. "She's property." Ranger growled. Low. Deep. Controlled. Ethan's eyes didn't leave the man's face. "She's not yours anymore." And for the first time, something changed. Not in the storm. Not in the forest. In the man's eyes. A flicker. Small. But real. And that was all Ethan needed to know. Because now, this wasn't just about survival. This was about something bigger. Something hidden. Something dangerous. And whatever Ranger had escaped from, wasn't done with her yet. The wind pushed harder through the trees, carrying loose snow in spirals that blurred the edges of everything. But the men didn't move, not the one in front, not the ones positioned in the shadows behind. And that stillness felt more dangerous than any sudden attack because it meant patience, it meant control, it meant they believed time was on their side. And Ethan knew that kind of confidence didn't come from guesswork, it came from certainty, from knowing the terrain, the situation, and the outcome they expected to unfold. Ranger pressed slightly closer against Ethan's leg, not seeking protection but reinforcing position, her presence now fully locked into his, her breathing heavier but steady, her eyes moving between the man in front and the shifting shapes behind them, tracking every possible threat without panic, without hesitation. Ethan adjusted his stance just enough to keep the puppies shielded while maintaining visibility, his weight balanced, his body angled, every movement minimal but intentional, because in situations like this, small details mattered more than force, and right now, force wasn't an option he could afford. You tracked her through a storm, Ethan said quietly, his voice calm, almost conversational, but carrying a weight that wasn't lost on the man in front of him. That means you're not just looking for a lost animal. The man's lips curved slightly, not a smile, not exactly. You were never the target, he said. You just got in the way. Ethan's expression didn't change. Then you should have picked a better place to run into me. A brief silence followed, heavy and deliberate, the kind that measured reactions, tested boundaries, and then the man stepped forward again, just one step, enough to shift the tension slightly, enough to signal escalation without committing to it fully. You don't understand the situation you're in, he said. Ethan's voice stayed level. Then explain it. The man's eyes flicked briefly to the bundle against Ethan's chest, then to Ranger, then back to Ethan's face. That dog is not just trained, he said. She was part of a program. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, not surprise, but confirmation. What kind of program? The man hesitated. Just for a second. But Ethan saw it. And that hesitation told him everything. The kind that doesn't officially exist, the man said finally. Ethan's gaze sharpened. Military? The man didn't answer directly. Advanced K-9 units, he said. Enhanced conditioning. Behavioral control. Tactical integration. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. He had heard of programs like that. Rumors. Whispers. Projects that blurred lines between training and something else. Something less controlled. And she ran, Ethan said. The man's expression hardened slightly. She was removed. Ranger growled again, louder this time, her body shifting forward half a step, her reaction immediate and visceral, and Ethan placed a firm hand against her shoulder, not to restrain, but to ground, to keep her aligned with him. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. That's not what she thinks happened. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. You're making a mistake, he said. Ethan shook his head once. No, he said. You already made it. Another shift in the air. Subtle. But real. The men behind moved slightly, not closing in, but adjusting, preparing, waiting for a signal that hadn't been given yet. The storm softened just enough for Ethan to see more clearly now, to catch glimpses of gear, posture, discipline, and it all pointed to the same thing. This wasn't random. This wasn't freelance. This was organized. Structured. And that made it worse. You think this is about a dog, Ethan continued. But it's not, is it? The man didn't respond immediately. She's not the problem, Ethan said. She's the evidence. That landed. Ethan saw it in the man's eyes, in the slight tightening of his jaw, in the way the silence stretched just a little longer than before. You're smarter than you look, the man said finally. Ethan didn't react. And you're not telling me everything. The man exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold air. "You're standing in the middle of something you don't understand," he said. "Something that doesn't end well for people who get involved." Ethan's voice dropped slightly. It already didn't end well for her. Ranger shifted again, her body pressing slightly into Ethan's side, her presence grounding him, reminding him exactly why he wasn't stepping back, exactly why this wasn't negotiable anymore. The man's gaze lingered on the dog for a moment, something unreadable passing through his expression, something almost like recognition, almost like regret, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Hand her over," he said finally. "And you walk away." The wind moved through the trees again, carrying snow between them, distorting the space, but not the tension. Ethan didn't respond right away. He looked down at Ranger. Really looked at her. At the exhaustion in her body. The frost in her fur. The way she still held herself ready despite everything. Despite the cold. Despite the fight. Despite the fear. And then he looked at the puppies. Small. Fragile. Alive, because she hadn't given up. Because she had stayed. Because she had fought. Even when she was alone. Ethan exhaled slowly, something settling inside him, something final. "No," he said. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just absolute. The silence that followed was different. Heavier. Sharper. The kind that came right before things broke. The man's expression didn't change much. But his eyes did. "You don't get to say no," he said quietly. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "I just did. And that was it. No more talking. No more testing." The man gave a small nod. Not to Ethan. To the others. And everything shifted. The figures in the trees moved instantly, coordinated, controlled, closing angles, cutting off escape routes, their positions tightening around Ethan and Ranger in a way that spoke of planning, of repetition, of experience. This wasn't their first time doing this. But Ethan didn't move either. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He adjusted. Subtle. Precise. His stance shifted slightly, his weight balanced, his body aligned with Ranger's, their positions locking together like pieces of something that had been built long before this moment. "Stay with me," he said quietly. Ranger didn't hesitate. And then it began. Not chaos. Not noise. Movement. Fast. Controlled. One from the left. One from behind. Another cutting forward. Ethan pivoted instantly, using the terrain, using the trees, forcing angles tight, limiting approach, making them come in close where their numbers mattered less. Ranger moved with him, not chasing, not overcommitting, striking only when necessary, disrupting timing, breaking momentum. The first attacker came in fast, too fast, and Ethan used it, redirecting, turning force against itself, dropping him hard into the snow without breaking rhythm. Another closed in immediately, but Ranger intercepted, not wild, not reckless, controlled and precise, targeting just enough to disrupt without losing position. This wasn't a fight. This was survival. And they were doing it together. But the numbers were still there. Still closing. Still pressing. And then, something changed. A sound. Not from the attackers. Not from the storm. From the puppies. One of them cried out. Weak. Fading. Ethan felt it instantly, like a shock through his chest, his focus splitting for just a fraction of a second, and that was all it took. One of the attackers shifted position, faster than the others, exploiting the gap, closing distance with precision. Ethan reacted, but not fast enough to stop it completely. The man's hand reached out, grabbing, aiming not for Ethan, but for the dog. Ranger saw it. And in that moment, she didn't hesitate. She moved. Not to protect herself. Not to escape. To protect the puppies. She broke formation. Just for a second. And that second changed everything. The attacker adjusted instantly, shifting his angle, his target now fully on her, Ethan's eyes snapped wide. Ranger, no, but it was too late. The man lunged. And everything exploded into motion, the moment fractured into pieces, movement, breath, snow, instinct, and in that split second where everything could have collapsed, Ranger didn't retreat, didn't hesitate, didn't even consider escape. She drove forward instead, her entire body committing to a line that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with protection, her teeth striking the attacker's arm with controlled precision, not tearing wildly, not losing focus, but locking him just long enough to break his grip before it ever reached the puppies, and Ethan felt something inside him snap back into place, something old, something buried, something that had been waiting for a reason to return. He moved instantly, faster than thought, his body reacting before his mind could catch up, pivoting hard, driving into the attacker with force that wasn't just strength but memory, training, years of instinct compressed into one decisive movement that dropped the man into the snow and removed him from the equation in a single controlled motion. "Stay with me," Ethan barked, not loud, but sharp, cutting through the chaos, and Ranger responded immediately, breaking contact, returning to position beside him without chasing, without overcommitting, her breathing heavy but steady, her eyes still locked onto the shifting threats around them. The others adjusted quickly, faster than most would, pulling back slightly, recalibrating, not rushing in blindly, and that told Ethan everything he needed to know. These weren't just trained, they were experienced. They knew how to fight someone like him, which meant this wasn't their first time dealing with resistance like this. The man in front stepped back slightly, not retreating, just creating space, his eyes moving between Ethan and Ranger now with a new level of calculation, a new understanding that the situation wasn't as simple as it had been seconds ago. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice still calm, but tighter now, less certain. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't waste words. He adjusted his grip on the puppies, feeling their faint movements against his chest, feeling the fragile life he was carrying, and something in him locked down completely. There was no negotiation anymore. No compromise. Just a line. And they had already crossed it. Another attacker shifted to the right, trying to create an opening, trying to draw Ethan's attention, but Ranger moved with him, matching the angle, cutting off the space before it could be used, her body low, controlled, her focus absolute despite the exhaustion pulling at her muscles. Ethan saw it, how close she was to the edge, how much she had already given, and yet she didn't slow, didn't falter, didn't step back. He had seen that before too. In men who refused to fall even when their bodies had already given out. And he knew what it meant. They couldn't afford a prolonged fight. Not like this. Not with the puppies. Not with her condition. They needed an exit. Now. His eyes scanned quickly, mapping terrain, angles, movement, calculating distance to the narrow path he had seen earlier, a tighter corridor through the trees that would limit their attacker's ability to surround them. "We break left," he said quietly. Ranger didn't hesitate. She shifted instantly, aligning with the new direction, ready. Ethan moved. Fast. Not running blindly, but cutting through the gap before it could close, using momentum, using surprise, forcing the attackers to react instead of control. It worked, but only for a second. The men adjusted quickly, moving to intercept, cutting off angles, trying to collapse the space again. One of them lunged forward, faster than the others, trying to grab Ethan's arm, trying to disrupt his balance, but Ethan pivoted, redirected, drove him down without stopping, without losing pace. Ranger stayed tight, covering the rear, snapping at any movement that came too close, buying seconds, buying space, buying survival. They pushed into the narrow corridor, trees closing in around them, branches scraping against jackets and fur, the snow thicker here, deeper, slowing movement but also limiting visibility for everyone. That was the advantage. That was the only advantage. The attackers followed. Of course they did. But now they had to come in tighter. Closer. More exposed. And that changed the dynamic. Ethan slowed just enough to control the space, turning slightly, using the trees as barriers, forcing single approach instead of multiple angles. Ranger moved with him, her body now visibly shaking from exhaustion, but still holding, still focused, still refusing to break. "Almost there," Ethan muttered, more to her than himself. He could feel her fading. Not mentally. Never mentally. Physically. And that was the danger. Because once the body gave out, the rest followed. A branch snapped behind them. Closer. Faster. One of the attackers pushed through the corridor, committing fully now, abandoning caution for speed. Ethan saw it, adjusted, stepped into it, not away, meeting the movement with controlled force, using the narrow space to his advantage, dropping the man hard into the snow and blocking the path behind him for just a second longer. It was enough. They broke through the corridor. The terrain opened slightly ahead, sloping downward into a lower section of forest where the snow thinned just enough to allow faster movement. Ethan didn't stop. He pushed forward, his legs burning now, the weight of the puppies pulling at his core, but he didn't slow. Ranger stayed with him, barely, her breathing rough now, her steps less stable, but still aligned, still refusing to fall behind. The sounds behind them grew distant. Not gone. Never gone. But farther. Slower. The attackers had lost immediate contact. For now. Ethan finally slowed after several minutes, turning slightly, scanning, listening. Nothing immediate. Just the storm. Just the forest. Just the silence that came after something violent had passed through. He exhaled slowly, his body loosening just enough to function again, and then he dropped to one knee carefully, lowering the bundle of puppies slightly, checking them quickly. They were still alive. Barely. But alive. One of them moved weakly. Another let out a faint, trembling sound. "Stay with me," he whispered again, his voice softer now, more human, less controlled. Ranger stepped closer, her body finally giving in just a little, her legs shaking as she lowered herself into the snow beside him, her head dipping slightly, her breathing heavy and uneven. Ethan looked at her. Really looked at her. And what he saw hit harder than anything that had happened in the last few minutes. She was fading. Fast. He reached out, his hand brushing against her neck again, feeling the cold, the exhaustion, the fight still burning inside her despite everything. "Hey," he said quietly. "You don't get to stop now." Her eyes lifted slowly, locking onto his again. And for the first time, there was no warning in them. No defense. Just trust. Pure. Complete. And that changed something inside Ethan in a way he hadn't expected. In a way he hadn't felt in years. He looked around quickly, scanning for shelter, for anything that could give them time, and then he saw it, a fallen tree, partially hollowed, creating a small pocket of space beneath it, shielded from wind, hidden from direct view. It wasn't much. But it was enough. "We hold there," he said, more to himself now. He moved carefully, lifting the puppies again, guiding Ranger with him, step by step, until they reached the shelter. He crouched down, sliding into the space, pulling Ranger in beside him, using his body, his jacket, whatever he had left to create warmth, to create protection. The storm raged outside. The forest moved. Time stretched. And for a moment, just a moment, they were still. Safe. Breathing. Alive. Ethan leaned back slightly, his head resting against the rough wood behind him, his eyes closing for just a second. Just 1 second. And in that second, something shifted. A memory. A feeling. A voice he hadn't heard in years. And when his eyes opened again, they didn't look the same. Because this wasn't just about survival anymore. This wasn't just about a storm. Or a dog. Or a fight in the woods. This was something else. Something bigger. Something that had just started to surface. And somewhere out there, the men who had been hunting Ranger were already closing the distance again. The hollow beneath the fallen tree barely held them, barely blocked the wind that still found its way through every crack and opening, but it was enough, for now, and Ethan stayed perfectly still, not because he was resting, not because he was safe, but because he was listening, because in moments like this survival wasn't about movement, it was about awareness, about knowing when the next threat would come and from where, and right now the storm was doing something strange, something subtle but dangerous. It was quieting. Not stopping. never stopping, but shifting, lowering its voice just enough that other sounds could begin to surface again. Ranger felt it too. Even in her weakened state, her head lifted slightly, her ears adjusting, her breathing still heavy but more controlled now, her body pressed close against Ethan's side as if drawing strength from the shared warmth, the shared presence, the shared fight they were now in together. Ethan looked down at the puppies again, adjusting the fabric around them, checking each one with quick, practiced movements, his fingers brushing gently over their small bodies, counting breaths, counting movement, counting life. One of them twitched. Another let out a faint, broken whimper. Still there. Still holding on. "You're not done yet," he whispered, his voice low, almost lost beneath the fading wind. Ranger shifted slightly at the sound, her eyes moving from the puppies back to Ethan, watching him, studying him, and in that look there was something new, not just trust, but recognition, like she understood now that he wasn't just helping, he was committed, fully, completely, the same way she had been when she stayed with them through the storm. That bond, fragile as it was, locked in deeper in that moment. Ethan leaned back again, his shoulders pressing against the rough wood, his muscles finally registering the strain, the cold, the fight, the weight of everything he was carrying, but he didn't let it take over, didn't let it slow him down, because something else was pushing forward now, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. It had been buried under years of silence, years of trying to be something else, someone who didn't step into situations like this, who didn't carry the responsibility of survival on his shoulders anymore. But here it was. Back again. And he didn't fight it this time. A sound broke through the quiet. Faint. But clear. Ethan's eyes snapped open instantly, his body going still again, his breathing slowing, controlled. Ranger reacted at the same moment, her head lifting higher now, her body tightening slightly despite the exhaustion. Footsteps. Not rushed. Not scattered. Measured. Controlled. Closer than before. They had tracked them. Faster than expected. That meant one thing. They knew this terrain better than he did. Ethan's mind moved quickly, recalculating, adjusting. The shelter had bought them time. But not enough. Not nearly enough. He looked down at Ranger again, reading her condition, her strength, her limits. She could still move. But not far. Not fast. Not like before. And the puppies, they weren't going to survive another long push through the storm without more warmth, more protection. They needed something else. Something better. Something solid. A structure. A place. His mind scanned a map of this area he had studied before coming out here, fragments of memory piecing together under pressure, and then it hit him. An old Ranger outpost. Abandoned. Not on any current maps. But still there. It had to be. "We move again," he said quietly. Ranger didn't hesitate. She shifted, pushing herself up slowly, her legs unsteady for a second before locking again, her body aligning with his without question. That alone told Ethan everything. She wasn't done. Not yet. He adjusted the puppies again, securing them tighter, pulling his jacket closer around them, creating as much insulation as possible, and then he moved. Slow at first. Silent. Every step placed carefully, avoiding loose branches, avoiding unnecessary sound. The footsteps behind them grew clearer. Closer. Not rushing. Still confident. Still controlled. They weren't worried about losing the trail. Because they weren't relying on sight alone. They were tracking. Scent. Movement. Patterns. Ranger paused briefly, her nose lifting slightly, catching something Ethan couldn't, her body shifting direction slightly. He followed without question. Because now, he trusted her instincts more than his own. They moved through a denser section of forest, the trees tighter, the ground uneven, forcing slower movement but offering more cover. The storm outside continued to ease, just enough that visibility improved in fragments, shadows becoming clearer, shapes more defined. And then Ethan saw it. Through the trees ahead. A structure. Barely visible. half buried in snow and time. But real. There, he whispered. Ranger saw it too. Her pace didn't increase, but her focus sharpened. They pushed forward, closing the distance, the structure growing clearer, a small wooden outpost, old, weathered, but intact enough to provide shelter. Ethan reached it first, his hand moving quickly to the door, testing it. Frozen. Of course. He didn't waste time. He stepped back slightly, then drove his shoulder into it hard. Once. Twice. The wood cracked slightly. A third hit, and the door gave just enough to force open. Cold air rushed out, stale and still, but inside, it was quieter. Shielded. Protected. Ethan moved in immediately, scanning the interior quickly, empty, abandoned, but usable. That was enough. Inside, he said, guiding Ranger in with him. She stepped in slowly, her body finally giving in slightly as she crossed the threshold, her legs weakening for just a second before she steadied herself again. Ethan closed the door behind them, forcing it shut as best he could, blocking the wind, the snow, the outside world. And for the first time since this had started, there was silence. Not complete. Never complete. But enough. Enough to think. Enough to breathe. Enough to act. He moved quickly, clearing a space on the floor, laying the puppies down carefully, using his remaining gear, scraps of fabric, anything he had to create insulation, to create warmth. Ranger lowered herself beside them immediately, her body curling around them again, instinct taking over despite her exhaustion. Ethan knelt beside her, his hand resting against her side, feeling her breathing, her heartbeat. Still strong. But fading. Stay with me, he said quietly. Her eyes opened slightly, locking onto his again. Still there. Still fighting. Ethan looked around the outpost quickly, searching for anything useful, old supplies, dry wood, anything that could help them hold out longer, and then he found it. A small, rusted stove in the corner. Cold. Empty. But intact. His mind shifted instantly. Fire. Warmth. Survival. He moved to it, checking quickly, clearing it, preparing it, his hands working fast despite the cold biting into his fingers. Ranger watched him from across the room, her eyes tracking every movement, every shift, and for the first time, she didn't look like she was guarding anymore. She looked like she was waiting. Trusting. And that changed everything. Ethan struck the lighter once. Nothing. Again. A small spark. Again, and this time, flame. Small. Weak. But real. He fed it carefully, building it, coaxing it, bringing it to life, and slowly, warmth began to return to the space. The puppies shifted. Slightly. More movement now. More life. Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing just a fraction. But only a fraction. Because outside, the footsteps had stopped. Not faded. Not disappeared. Stopped. Right outside. And then, a knock. Slow. Deliberate. And not from the storm. Ethan's hand froze over the flame. Ranger's head lifted instantly, her body tensing again despite everything. And a voice came through the door. Calm. Controlled. Too close. You don't have anywhere else to go, the man said. Silence followed. Heavy. Pressing. And Ethan knew, this wasn't over. Not even close. The knock didn't come again, and somehow that made it worse, because it meant patience, it meant confidence, it meant whoever was outside knew exactly how much pressure silence could apply, and Ethan stayed where he was, crouched beside the small flame, his hand hovering just above it, not for warmth but for steadiness, for focus, his breathing slow, controlled, his mind already moving ahead of the moment, breaking it down, mapping every possible outcome, every possible move. Ranger didn't bark, didn't rush the door, didn't react the way an untrained dog might have. Instead, she shifted her body slightly, positioning herself between the puppies and the door, her posture low, her eyes locked forward, her entire presence communicating one clear message: this space was no longer neutral, it was defended. Ethan saw it and understood immediately. Good, he whispered under his breath, not looking at her, but feeling her alignment with him, the unspoken coordination building between them stronger with every second. Outside, the wind moved again, softer now, brushing against the structure instead of tearing at it, and that quiet allowed other sounds to surface, boots shifting against snow, faint but deliberate, multiple positions adjusting just beyond the walls. They weren't just at the door. They were surrounding the outpost. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "They are not rushing," he murmured. Ranger's ears twitched, confirming what he already knew. That meant they didn't need to. That meant they believed time was working in their favor. That meant they were waiting for something. Or someone. The voice came again, slightly closer this time, just on the other side of the door. "You're cold," the man said, calm, almost conversational. "You're carrying too much weight. And that dog, she's not going to last much longer." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't give him anything. Because men like that didn't speak to inform. They spoke to control. To influence. To create doubt. And Ethan didn't let doubt in. Not anymore. He moved slightly, adjusting the small fire, feeding it carefully, building just enough heat without creating too much light, too much visibility from outside. Every detail mattered now. Every flicker. Every shadow. Ranger shifted again, her body tightening slightly at the man's words, not out of fear, but reaction. She understood tone, intention, and something in that voice triggered something deeper in her, something Ethan hadn't fully seen yet. "You know him," Ethan said quietly, finally glancing at her. Her eyes flicked to him for a second, then back to the door. Not confirmation. But not denial either. That was enough. The voice outside continued. "You think she chose you," the man said. "But she didn't. She's conditioned. Everything she's doing, everything she's reacting to, it was built into her." Ethan's expression didn't change. But something inside him shifted slightly. Because that was the angle. That was the play. Undermine the bond. Break the trust. "She stayed," Ethan said quietly, his voice low but steady, cutting through the silence inside the outpost more than the storm outside. That wasn't conditioning. Ranger's ears flicked again. Subtle. But real. The man didn't respond immediately. Then, a soft exhale. "You really believe that?" Ethan didn't answer. Because belief wasn't the point anymore. Action was. He scanned the room again, quickly, looking for anything he could use, anything that could give them leverage, and his eyes landed on a small window near the back, partially covered, frost clinging to the edges. An exit. Maybe. But exposed. Risky. Still, an option. He shifted slightly, his movements slow, careful, not drawing attention, his mind already building the next step. Ranger watched him now, not the door, her eyes tracking his movements, reading him, understanding the shift, the plan forming even without words. That kind of connection didn't come from training alone. It came from trust. And trust had already been earned. The man outside spoke again, his tone changing slightly, less conversational now, more direct. "We're not here to kill you," he said. "But we will if we have to." Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then you should have done it already." Silence. Then a faint sound. Movement. Not aggressive. Not rushing. Just repositioning. Ethan's mind sharpened instantly. Something had changed. The waiting phase was ending. "They are moving," he whispered. Ranger stood. Fully now. Her legs shaky but locked, her body ready despite everything she had already endured. Ethan moved too, rising slowly, adjusting the puppies one last time, securing them tight against his chest, then reaching down briefly, his hand resting against Ranger's neck. "We don't get another shot," he said quietly. She didn't move. Didn't blink. Just stayed. Ready. The first impact hit the door hard. Not enough to break it. But enough to test it. Ethan didn't react outwardly. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He moved to position. One side of the room. Limited angles. Controlled space. The second hit came stronger. Wood cracked slightly. Snow shook loose from the frame. The third would break it. Ethan knew it. They all did. Ranger shifted slightly, placing herself just off his side, not in front, not behind, but exactly where she needed to be to respond to whatever came through that door first. The third hit came. The door splintered inward. And everything exploded into motion. The first man through the opening moved fast, but not fast enough. Ethan stepped into it, using the broken doorway as a choke point, limiting entry, forcing them one at a time, his movements sharp, controlled, efficient, dropping the first attacker before he could fully clear the threshold. Ranger moved immediately after, targeting the second, not chasing, not overcommitting, just enough to break his momentum, to force him back into the others behind him. Back, the man outside shouted, his voice sharper now. The attackers pulled back slightly, regrouping, recalibrating. They hadn't expected resistance like this. Not in such a confined space. Not with limited visibility. Not with the dog still fighting. Ethan didn't press forward. Didn't chase. He held position. Because that was the advantage. The doorway. The choke point. The control. The man stepped into view again, just beyond the broken door, his eyes locked onto Ethan now, not calm anymore, not relaxed. Focused. Calculating. "You're running out of time," he said. Ethan's voice didn't change. "So are you." The man's gaze flicked briefly to Ranger again. Something shifted. Small. But real. And then he did something unexpected. He stepped forward alone. No rush. No backup. Just him. "You want to protect her?" he said quietly. Ethan didn't respond. The man stopped just outside the doorway. "Close enough now." "Too close." "Then you should know the truth," he said. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Which is?" The man's voice dropped. "She wasn't just trained." A pause. Heavy. Then, "She was the only one that survived." The words hit differently. Not like a threat. Like a revelation. Ranger's body tensed instantly. Not aggression. Something else. Something deeper. Something buried. Ethan felt it. Saw it. And for the first time, uncertainty entered the space between them. Because whatever that meant, it wasn't simple. And the man knew it. He stepped back slightly, just enough to create distance again. "Ask yourself why," he said. The storm outside shifted again. The fire inside flickered. Ranger's breathing changed. And Ethan realized something in that moment that changed everything. This wasn't just a recovery operation. This wasn't just about taking her back. This was about something they didn't want him to know. Something she had survived. Something they were trying to contain. And whatever it was, they were willing to burn everything down to keep it buried. The words didn't fade, they lingered, hanging in the air like something heavier than the storm outside, something that pressed inward, tightening the space between Ethan and Ranger in a way that wasn't physical but psychological, because now there was a question where certainty had been, and in situations like this, even the smallest crack could become a fracture if it wasn't handled immediately. Ethan didn't look at the man. He didn't give him the reaction he was clearly waiting for. Instead, he looked down at Ranger, really looked at her, not just as a survivor, not just as a protector, but as something that had lived through something deeper, something darker, something that had left a mark he was only just beginning to understand. Her breathing had changed. Subtle, but real. Her body wasn't just tense anymore, it was reacting. Not to the threat in front of her. To the words. Her eyes flicked once toward the man, then back to Ethan, and in that moment, something passed between them that had nothing to do with training or instinct. It was recognition. Not of the man. Of the truth behind what he said. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Doesn't matter, he said quietly. The man tilted his head slightly. It does, he replied. Because whatever you think you're protecting, isn't what you think it is. Ethan shook his head once, slow, deliberate. No, he said. What I think I'm protecting is right here. His hand pressed gently against the puppy's. Ranger shifted closer at that, her body grounding again, her breathing stabilizing slightly, as if his words had anchored something inside her that had started to slip. The man watched that interaction closely. Too closely. You think she chose that? He said. You think those puppies are just hers? Ethan didn't respond immediately. Because something about that question felt wrong. Not in the way it was asked. In the implication behind it. Ranger's body tensed again, sharper this time, her eyes narrowing slightly, her focus shifting between Ethan and the man, and for the first time since this started, there was something else in her posture. Not just defense. Not just protection. Conflict. Ethan felt it instantly. Say what you're trying to say, Ethan said, his voice dropping lower now, more controlled, more dangerous. The man's expression didn't change. But his tone did. Those aren't just puppies, he said. Silence. Heavy. Thick. Pressing. Ethan's eyes moved down to the bundle in his arms. Small. Fragile. Breathing. Alive. He had seen countless animals in his life. Canine units. Field rescues. Wild encounters. But now, he looked again. Really looked. Their fur patterns weren't uniform. Their size variation was slightly off. Subtle differences that, in another moment, he might have dismissed. But not now. Not after that statement. Not after everything else. Ranger shifted again, stepping slightly closer, her body brushing against his leg, her presence grounding, but also, protective in a different way now. Not just of them. Of him. You're lying, Ethan said. The man shook his head slowly. You think I need to lie right now? Another pause. Then, look at them. Ethan didn't want to. But he did. Slowly. Carefully. His eyes scanning over the small bodies again, searching for something he hadn't noticed before. Something that would confirm, or deny. And then he saw it. One of them shifted. Weak. Slow. But when it did, its eyes opened for just a fraction of a second. Not fully. Not clearly. But enough. And something about them wasn't right. Not wrong. Not unnatural. Just different. Ethan's breath slowed. His mind recalibrated instantly, not jumping to conclusions, not reacting emotionally, just processing, analyzing, locking onto details. Ranger's breathing changed again. Faster now. Not fear. Not aggression. Something closer to anxiety. You see it, the man said quietly. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't look up. Not yet. Because now the situation had shifted in a way he hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just about survival. This wasn't just about escape. This was about something far more complicated. Far more dangerous. She didn't just survive the program, the man continued. She adapted. Ethan's eyes snapped up. To what? The man's gaze held his. That's what we're trying to contain. Ranger growled. Low. Deep. Different this time. Not a warning. A reaction. Ethan felt it. Understood it. Whatever this was, she wasn't just protecting those puppies out of instinct. She was protecting something else. Something she knew they were after. You don't take her, Ethan said, his voice steady again, but harder now. The man sighed slightly, almost disappointed. You still think this is a choice? Another shift outside. Movement. Not just repositioning. Preparation. Ethan saw it in the man's posture, in the way his shoulders adjusted, in the way the others moved just beyond the broken doorway. This was it. The final push. Last chance, the man said. Ethan didn't hesitate. No, the word landed clean. Final. Absolute. And that was enough. The man stepped back. The others moved forward. Not cautious now. Not controlled. Committed. Ethan shifted instantly, pulling back slightly from the doorway, forcing them into the narrow entry again, his body aligning with Ranger's, their positions locking into place like they had done this 100 times before. The first attacker came in fast. Ethan dropped him. The second pushed harder. Ranger intercepted. The third tried to break through the side. Ethan adjusted, redirected, forced him back. The fight intensified. Faster. Harder. Less controlled. The attackers were done testing. Done waiting. They were taking what they came for. But so was Ethan. And now, he wasn't just protecting a dog. He wasn't just protecting puppies. He was protecting the truth. Whatever it was. Whatever it meant. And that made him more dangerous than they had planned for. The space filled with movement, impact, breath, force, the fire flickering widely as shadows moved across the walls, the storm outside roaring again as if reacting to the violence inside. Ranger moved with him, even as her strength began to fade, even as her body pushed beyond its limits. She didn't break, didn't fall, didn't step back. Because this wasn't about survival anymore. This was about something deeper. Something instinct couldn't explain. Something only choice could define. And then, everything shifted again. A sound. Sharp. Close. Not from the door. From behind. Ethan's head snapped toward the back wall. A crack. Wood splitting. Another entry point. And before he could react, it broke. And the fight changed completely. The wall didn't just crack, it gave way, splintering inward under controlled force, not random damage, not chaos, but a planned breach, and that realization hit Ethan instantly because it meant one thing: they had never intended to rely on the door alone. They had been shaping this entire engagement from the start, applying pressure, forcing position, guiding movement until the moment came when they could collapse the space completely. And now, that moment had arrived. Cold air rushed in from behind, carrying snow and darkness with it, and through that opening came another figure, faster than the others, more direct, more precise, moving not toward Ethan, but toward the puppies. Ranger reacted before Ethan could even shift his stance. Her body surged forward, not with the same strength she had before, not with the same speed, but with something else, something deeper, something fueled by the last reserves of everything she had left. She collided with the attacker mid-motion, forcing him off his line, disrupting the trajectory just enough to save those critical seconds. Ethan pivoted instantly, adjusting to the new angle, pulling the puppies tighter against his chest as he shifted position, placing himself between them and both entry points now, his body becoming the center of a shrinking battlefield where every inch mattered. The attackers pressed harder now, no longer testing, no longer calculating, they were committing fully, their movements sharper, more aggressive, their coordination tightening as they pushed from both sides, trying to overwhelm, trying to force a mistake. Ethan didn't give them one. His movements became even more precise, more controlled, every step deliberate, every shift calculated, using the broken space, the debris, the angles to limit their approach, to keep them from gaining full access. But the pressure was increasing. Too many. Too fast. Ranger fought beside him, her strike still accurate, still effective, but her body was failing, her movement slowing just slightly, just enough that Ethan could see it, could feel it, and that was the problem. Because they didn't need her to break completely. They just needed her to slow down. And then it happened. One of the attackers slipped through the gap, just a fraction, just enough, and his hand reached forward, fingers closing around one of the puppies before Ethan could fully adjust. Time didn't slow. It stopped. Ethan's entire world narrowed to that single point of contact, that single movement, that single threat. No, the word came out low. Controlled. but absolute. He moved. Not fast. Not rushed. Perfect. His body shifted, his arm drove forward, redirecting, breaking the grip before it could secure, the puppy slipping free back into the bundle as the attacker was forced off balance. Ranger struck at the same moment, not at the attacker's body, but at the space, the timing, breaking the sequence, forcing him back again. But the damage was done. Not physical. Psychological. The attackers had seen the opening. They knew it was there. And now, they would push it harder. Ethan's breathing changed. Not faster. Sharper. More focused. Because now he understood something clearly. They weren't trying to kill him. They were trying to extract the target. The dog. The puppies. Whatever they represented. And that meant he wasn't the priority. Which meant, he could change the equation. He shifted his stance slightly, his body turning, not to defend, but to reposition. Ranger saw it instantly. Her eyes locked onto his, reading the movement, the intention, the plan forming without words. "We move," he said quietly. Not hesitation. Not doubt. Decision. He stepped back suddenly, breaking the static hold of the room, forcing movement, forcing the attackers to adjust again, to react instead of control. Ranger followed immediately, staying tight, covering the rear as Ethan moved toward the broken section of the wall instead of away from it. The attackers hesitated for half a second, just enough. That was all Ethan needed. He pushed through the opening, out into the storm again, the cold hitting like a wall, the wind returning with full force, visibility dropping instantly, turning everything into chaos once more. Ranger came through right behind him, her body stumbling slightly as she hit the snow, but she recovered, aligning again, refusing to fall behind. The attackers followed. Of course they did. But now the environment had changed again. Now the storm was back in play. Now visibility was gone. Now control was broken. Ethan moved fast, angling downhill, using gravity, using terrain, using everything he had learned over years of moving through environments like this under pressure. The snow was deeper here, slowing movement, but also masking it, hiding tracks, distorting direction. Ranger stayed with him, barely, her breathing rough now, her body pushing beyond limits it shouldn't have been able to reach. Ethan could feel it. She was at the edge. But she wasn't stopping. Because she couldn't. Because something inside her wouldn't let her. The sounds behind them grew distant again, not gone, but scattered, the attackers forced to adjust to the terrain, to the storm, to the loss of visual control. Ethan didn't slow. Not yet. Not until he found what he needed. And then, he saw it. The slope dropped sharply ahead, leading into a narrow ice-covered channel, a frozen stream cutting through the terrain, its surface slick, unstable, dangerous, but also, useful. "That's it," he muttered. He shifted direction immediately, moving toward it, his steps careful but fast, reaching the edge of the frozen surface and stopping just long enough to adjust his balance. Ranger reached him seconds later, her body trembling now, her strength nearly gone, but her eyes still locked onto him, still waiting, still trusting. "Stay close," he said. Then he stepped onto the ice. It cracked slightly under his weight. Not breaking. But warning. He moved anyway. Fast. Controlled. Each step placed carefully, minimizing impact, distributing weight, crossing the surface at an angle instead of straight through. Ranger followed. Slower. More unstable. But still moving. Still with him. The sounds behind them reached the edge of the stream. Stopped. Hesitated. The attackers weren't willing to commit blindly. Not onto unstable ground. Not without certainty. Ethan reached the other side, stepping off the ice, turning immediately, watching, waiting. Ranger made it seconds later, her body finally giving in as she reached solid ground, collapsing into the snow, her breathing heavy, uneven. Ethan dropped to one knee beside her instantly, his hand pressing against her side. "Hey, hey," her eyes opened slightly. Still there. Still fighting. but barely. He looked back at the stream. The attackers stood on the other side. Watching. Calculating. But not crossing. Not yet. The man stepped forward slightly, stopping at the edge, his eyes locked onto Ethan. "You can't keep this up," he said, his voice carrying faintly through the storm. Ethan didn't respond. Because he knew. He felt it. Ranger was at her limit. The puppies were fading. The storm was getting worse again. And time was almost gone. But there was one thing the man didn't know. One thing Ethan had already decided. This wasn't about outlasting them anymore. This was about ending it. And somewhere ahead, in the darkness beyond the storm, he knew there was one last move left to make. And it was going to change everything. The storm swallowed the distance between them, but not the truth of the situation, and Ethan stayed kneeling beside Ranger for just a second longer than he could afford, his hand pressed firmly against her side, feeling the uneven rhythm of her breathing, the tremor in her muscles, the exhaustion that had pushed far beyond what any body should have been able to endure, and yet she was still here, still conscious, still watching him with eyes that refused to close. "Stay with me," he said again, his voice lower now, steadier, not a plea, not desperation, command, grounded in belief, the same belief he had seen in her since the moment he found her in that ravine, the same belief that had kept her alive long enough for him to arrive. Ranger's eyes held his, and in that moment something passed between them that didn't need language, didn't need explanation, it was agreement. She wasn't done. Not yet. Ethan looked back across the frozen stream. The men hadn't crossed. They wouldn't, not like this, not without certainty, not without control. That hesitation was the first real break he had seen in them since this started. And that meant one thing. They weren't invincible. They were cautious. And cautious men could be outplayed. Ethan stood slowly, his body heavy now, every muscle protesting, but his mind sharper than ever, clearer than it had been in years, because now everything had stripped down to its core, no noise, no distraction, no hesitation. Just action. He adjusted the puppies again, pulling them tighter against his chest, checking them one last time. Weak. But alive. Still alive. That was enough. He turned back to Ranger, crouching slightly, his hand resting against her neck. "You led me this far," he said quietly. "Now I finish it." Ranger shifted slightly, her body responding to his presence, her legs pushing beneath her again, slow, unsteady, but rising. She stood. Barely. But she stood. Ethan gave a small nod. "Yeah," he murmured. "That's what I thought." He turned, looking ahead into the storm, into the darkness beyond the trees, into the direction no one else was watching, no one else was expecting. That was the move. Not away from them. Through something they couldn't predict. He stepped forward. Ranger followed. Not because she was told. Because she chose to. They moved into the forest again, deeper this time, away from the known paths, away from the predictable routes, pushing into terrain that became rougher, steeper, more unstable, forcing slower movement, but also breaking lines of pursuit, breaking patterns, breaking control. Behind them, the men finally moved. Ethan heard it. The shift. The decision. They were crossing. Carefully. Slowly. But they were committing now. That meant the window was closing. Ethan pushed harder, his steps more urgent now, his breathing heavier, but still controlled, still locked into rhythm. Ranger struggled beside him, her body faltering more often now, but she didn't stop, didn't fall behind, her focus still locked forward, still aligned with him. The forest thinned ahead. The terrain opened. And then Ethan saw it. Not a structure. Not a path. A drop. A steep, narrow descent leading down into a lower valley, partially hidden, partially protected, a place where movement would be harder to track, where scent would scatter, where visibility would break completely. But it was dangerous. Too dangerous. For anyone not prepared. Ethan didn't hesitate. "We go down," he said. Ranger looked at him. Just for a second. And then she moved. They descended together, slow at first, careful, using roots, rocks, anything to maintain balance, the slope steep, the snow unstable, but Ethan guided the movement, controlling speed, controlling impact, minimizing risk. Behind them, the men reached the edge. Stopped. They saw it. Understood it. And for the first time, they hesitated. Because this wasn't controlled terrain anymore. This wasn't something they could manage easily. Ethan saw it. Felt it. And used it. He pushed harder now, faster, committing fully to the descent, trusting his footing, trusting his balance, trusting Ranger to stay with him. And she did. Even when she slipped. Even when her body faltered. She kept moving. Because she had chosen this path. With him. They reached the bottom. Ethan didn't stop. Not yet. He moved into the valley, deeper, until the terrain shifted again, the trees thicker, the ground uneven, the storm muted by the natural formation around them. And then, he stopped. He turned. Looked back up. The men were still at the top. Watching. Not following. Not yet. Maybe not at all. The distance. The terrain. The risk. It had broken their control. For the first time, they didn't have the advantage. Ethan exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not yet. But something close. He turned back to Ranger. And this time, she didn't stay standing. Her legs gave out beneath her, her body lowering into the snow, her breathing uneven, her strength finally reaching its limit. Ethan dropped beside her instantly, his hand pressing against her neck, his voice steady. "Hey, you're done fighting." Her eyes opened slowly. Still aware. Still present. He looked at the puppies. They moved. More now. Small. Weak. But alive. Alive because of her. Because she had stayed. Because she had chosen to protect them instead of run. Ethan sat there for a moment, the storm distant now, the world quieter, smaller, reduced to just this space, this moment, this outcome. He reached out, his hand resting gently against Ranger's head. "You don't belong to them," he said quietly. "You never did." Her eyes held his. And for the first time since he had found her, they softened completely. No tension. No warning. Just peace. Ethan looked out into the valley, into the path ahead, into the unknown that was no longer threatening, just open. And something inside him shifted. Not back to what it was. Something new. Something rebuilt. "We're not going back," he said softly. "Not to them. Not to that." Ranger didn't move. But she didn't need to. He understood her answer. He stood slowly, adjusting the puppies one last time, then carefully, gently, he lifted her. Despite the weight. Despite the exhaustion. Despite everything. He carried her. Because that's what you do, when something refuses to leave you behind. The storm faded behind them. The valley opened ahead. And as Ethan walked forward, Ranger in his arms, the puppies alive against his chest, something that had been broken for a long time, finally began to heal. Not all at once. Not completely. But enough. Enough to keep moving. Enough to keep going. And sometimes, that's all survival ever really is.